Alarms tore through my ship before I even opened my eyes. Metal screamed somewhere behind me, and the whole hull tilted hard to one side, throwing me against a wall of cold steel. My name is Daniel Hart, and 3 seconds ago, I was asleep in my bunk. Now I was awake, bleeding from my forehead, and my ship was dying around me. I had been hauling ice blocks between mining stations for 6 years. Quiet work, boring work, the kind of work where nothing ever happens, and you like it that way. But something had just ripped a hole through my cargo hold, and the emergency lights painted the corridor in flashing red. I pulled myself along the wall toward the escape pod bay, my boots slipping on loose bolts and broken panels. Behind me, through a cracked window, I saw it. A raider ship, black and jagged, cutting through space like a blade. It fired again, and my ship groaned like something alive that was about to die. I reached the pod, slammed the hatch shut, and hit the launch switch with a shaking hand. The pod shot out into open space, and through the tiny window, I watched my ship burst into a ball of orange fire. 6 years of my life, gone in a flash of light. The pod spun wildly, alarms screaming inside the small cabin. I had maybe an hour of air left, no engine power, and no working radio. I was alone, drifting, waiting to either freeze or suffocate, whichever came first. Then something huge blocked out the stars. A ship, larger than anything I had ever seen, moved slowly toward my pod. It was shaped like a flower, with long curved petals made of dark metal, glowing faintly with soft blue light. I had heard stories about ships like this from other haulers, whispered warnings passed between stations. They called it a nest ship. They said it belonged to a species called the Ithkara, insect people who lived in hives among the stars, and who nobody understood. I did not have time to decide if I should be afraid. A beam of light locked onto my pod and pulled it inside a massive open bay before I could even reach for a weapon I did not have. The pod door opened with a hiss, and cold air rushed in. I stumbled out, coughing from smoke that still clung to my clothes, and found myself staring up at creatures with dark shining shells and long, thin arms. My whole body went stiff. I braced for pain, or worse. Instead, gentle hands lifted me onto a table, careful not to hurt my broken ribs. I woke up later in a small room that smelled like warm honey and metal. My chest was wrapped tightly in soft bandages, and my head throbbed with a dull ache. A creature stood beside my bed, watching me, with 2 large eyes and antennae that moved on their own, like they had their own thoughts. She introduced herself in a smooth, clicking voice that came through a small device on her collar. Her name was Vethra, and she said she was a nurse, a caretaker for the ship. She had a way of tilting her head when she listened, like she wanted to hear more than just my words. For 3 days, she checked on me every few hours. She brought food that tasted strange, but filled my stomach, and she never once looked at me like I was something to fear or hate. She was patient with my questions, and there were many. I asked about her ship, her people, and why they had saved a human they did not know, and she answered every question with calm honesty, never rushing, never annoyed. On the 3rd night, my pain medicine made my head light and loose. I felt relaxed for the first time since the attack, and my mouth ran faster than my brain. So Vethra asked, very formally, if I needed anything before she left for the night. I looked at her, feeling giddy and a little foolish, and said the kind of joke you say to someone who has been kind to you in a hospital bed. "Marry me," I said, grinning. "Save me from all this, baby." I expected a laugh, or maybe a confused stare. Instead, her antennae went completely still, both of them frozen at the same moment, like she had been struck by something invisible. Her eyes widened, and a low sound came from deep in her chest, a sound the little device on her collar could not translate into any word I understood. "You consent," she said. It was not a question, it was a statement, calm and certain, like she was reading a fact off a screen. I laughed weakly, still thinking this was some strange misunderstanding that would pass. "Sure," I said. "Whatever you say." She turned and spoke quickly into a device on her wrist, using clicks and tones I could not follow. I caught only one word, repeated over and over by the voice on the other end, growing more excited each time. The word was baby, my word. Somehow, it had become part of her language, spoken back to her like wonderful news. I did not know it then, but I had just told an entire warship that I was married. The next morning, I learned the truth from Sovethra herself, sitting calmly at the edge of my bed, like she was explaining something simple and obvious. The Ithkara did not have weddings the way humans did. They did not have rings or papers or ceremonies with music. Instead, they had something called a baby bond, a tradition older than their written history, tied to the very beginning of their species. When a nurse offered care to someone weak or hurt, and that person accepted using the correct word, the bond was sealed. No paperwork. No delay, just words, spoken and accepted, forming a promise that could not be undone, and the correct word, the ancient term for one who is nursed and protected, had been translated by the ship's system into the friendliest word it could find in my language. Baby. I sat there in stunned silence as she explained this, the weight of it slowly sinking into my chest. Some machine, somewhere deep in this alien ship, had chosen to turn a sacred word into something casual, something I might say to a waitress pouring my coffee. And in doing so, it had turned my careless joke into a real and binding promise. Sovethra did not seem upset by any of this. If anything, she seemed pleased, her antennae swaying gently as she spoke. The same soft motion I had already learned meant she was happy. I opened my mouth to explain, to apologize, to somehow take it all back, but the words caught in my throat when the door to my room opened without warning. The Queen entered. I knew her the moment I saw her, even though nobody told me who she was. She moved like something that had never once needed to hurry, her massive frame filling the doorway, her shell so dark it seemed to swallow the light around her. 4 eyes locked onto me at once, each one tracking a different part of my body, like she was studying a puzzle she had never seen before. I forced myself to stand, ignoring the sharp pain in my ribs, because some instinct deep inside me said that staying seated in front of this creature would be a mistake. She circled me slowly, her steps silent despite her size, while Sovethra stood beside me without a trace of fear. Sovethra has taken a baby bond, the Queen said, her voice deep and slow, carried through the translator like something spoken from the bottom of a cave. The first in 11 cycles. I did not expect her to choose an outsider. Your Majesty, I began, my voice shaking more than I wanted it to. There has been a mistake. I was joking. I did not mean it the way it was taken. There has been no mistake, the Queen said, and something in her tone made the room feel smaller. You misunderstand the honor given to you. I felt a cold wave move through my body, colder than the vacuum of space I had nearly died in only days before. Sovethra reached over and placed one clawed hand gently on my shoulder, careful not to press too hard against my wounds. He is mine to keep, she said simply, as though stating something as plain as the color of the sky. The Queen studied me a moment longer, all 4 eyes unblinking, and then she made a low sound that I would later learn meant amusement. Then keep him well, third attendant, she said. Outsider blood runs thin in the cold of space. She turned her attention fully to me, and for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. You will not starve in my nest, she said. That is my word, and my word is law here. With that, she left the room as quietly as she had entered it, leaving me standing there, with my heart pounding and my mind spinning, trying to understand what my life had just become. Over the following days, I learned quickly that arguing with Ithkara tradition was like arguing with gravity. It did not care how confused or unwilling I was. The bond was set, recognized by the entire crew, and treated with a seriousness that left no room for debate. Sovethra never once acted like she had trapped me. She treated the bond as a gift she had been given, something precious and rare, and she cared for me with a gentleness that slowly wore down my fear. She brought me food from different parts of the ship, showed me rooms filled with strange plants that glowed faintly in the dark, and answered my endless questions with more patience than I felt I deserved. I asked her once, sitting in the quiet gardens near the center of the ship, why she had reacted the way she did to my joke. She looked at me for a long moment before answering, her antennae drooping slightly. A motion I had come to understand meant she was thinking carefully. In our old stories, she said, the first nurse of our people found a wounded stranger, drifting between stars, much like you. She healed him, and he spoke the sacred words to her without knowing their weight, and from that bond came the first great nest. Every attendant dreams of finding a stranger of their own. Most never do. Her words settled something inside me, even though my human mind still fought against the strangeness of it all. I had crashed into her life the same way that stranger had crashed into the life of her ancestor, centuries ago, and somehow, without meaning to, I had stepped into the middle of one of their oldest stories. Not everyone on the ship welcomed me so warmly. A guard named Vethka, sharp-eyed and quick to anger, made his dislike of me clear every time our paths crossed. He believed outsiders had no place inside the nest, and he did not hide his opinion, even when the queen was near enough to hear it. One evening, while I was walking alone through a lower corridor, trying to learn my way through the endless twisting halls of the ship, Vethka blocked my path. His claws clicked together in a slow, deliberate rhythm, a sound I had learned meant irritation among his people. "You do not belong here," he said, his translator flattening his words into something cold and sharp. "The bond is a mistake. You are weak. You will bring nothing but trouble to this nest." I stood my ground, even though my legs wanted to carry me the other way. "I did not ask for this," I told him honestly, "but I am not going to hide from you either." He studied me for a long moment, his antennae twitching with something I could not read, and then he stepped aside without another word, letting me pass. I walked away with my heart pounding, but something inside me had shifted. I was no longer just a frightened stranger stumbling through an alien world. I was starting to stand my ground in it. Weeks passed, and life on the ship settled into something I never expected to call comfortable. I learned to read simple patterns in the glowing lights along the walls, patterns that told the crew what part of the ship needed attention, or where danger might be waiting. I learned which foods were safe for a human stomach, and which ones made me sick for an entire day. I learned the rhythm of the ship itself, the way it breathed and hummed like something alive. So Vethra taught me most of this, patient through every mistake I made, never once treating me like a burden. She had a quiet strength about her, the kind that did not need to shout to be respected. And slowly, without me even noticing it happening, I began to trust her completely. Then, one quiet afternoon while I was helping her sort medical supplies in the small clinic where she worked, alarms exploded through the ship, filling every corridor with a piercing wail. So Vethra dropped what she was holding immediately, her whole body tensing. "Raiders," she said, her voice sharp with urgency. "The same ones who destroyed your ship. They have found us." My stomach dropped. The memory of fire and screaming metal rushed back into my mind, sharp and sudden, and for a moment I was frozen, back inside that dying ship all over again. So Vethra grabbed my arm, pulling me toward a reinforced section of the clinic, built to withstand attacks. "Stay here," she said firmly, pressing something small and metal into my hand. "If anyone who is not crew enters this room, use this." Before I could argue, she was gone, running toward the main deck to help the wounded that would soon be coming. I stood alone in that small room, gripping the strange weapon she had given me, listening to the ship shake around me as weapons fired outside its hull. I do not know how long I stood there, my heart hammering, every distant explosion sending a fresh wave of fear through my chest. Then the door burst open, and it was not crew who entered. It was a raider, tall and armored, his weapon already raised toward me. Instinct took over before fear could stop me. I raised the small weapon Vethra had given me and fired, my hands shaking but steady enough to hit my target. The raider staggered back through the doorway, and I slammed the emergency lock behind him, my whole body trembling. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. I stayed locked in that small room, listening to the sounds of fighting outside, praying that Vethra was safe somewhere on that same ship. When the alarms finally stopped and silence returned, it felt almost louder than the chaos before it. The door opened slowly, and I raised my weapon again, ready for another fight. Instead, it was Vethra, her shell scratched and dented, one arm held carefully against her side, but alive. Relief crashed through me so hard my knees nearly gave out. She looked at the weapon still in my hand, then at the locked door I had defended, and something in her eyes shifted into an expression I had never seen from her before. Respect. "You held this room," she said quietly. "You protected yourself, and you protected what was inside it." I did what you told me, I said, my voice shaking with the last of my adrenaline. I did not know what else to do. She stepped closer, ignoring the pain clear in her movements, and rested her uninjured hand against my chest, right where my heart was still pounding wildly. You are stronger than you believe, she said. My people saw a stranger drifting in the dark. I saw someone worth keeping. The raiders had been driven off, though not without cost. Several crew members were injured, and the ship itself carried new scars along its hull, but the nest had survived. In the days that followed, something had changed in how the crew looked at me. I was no longer just the strange outsider who had accidentally married their nurse through a careless joke. I had stood inside their walls during an attack and defended what mattered to them. Even Vethka, the guard who had once blocked my path with nothing but contempt in his eyes, found me one evening in the quiet garden where I often sat to think. He did not apologize, not exactly, but he stood beside me in silence for a long while before speaking. You fought well, he said finally, his voice lacking its usual sharp edge. Perhaps the old stories are not always mistaken. I did not know how to respond to that, so I simply nodded, and he walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts once again. Later that night, I found Sovethra in the medical bay, tending to the last of the wounded, with the same quiet patience she had shown me since the very first day. I watched her work for a while before she noticed me standing in the doorway. I used to think this was all some strange mistake, I told her honestly. A joke that got twisted into something I never meant. And now? She asked, setting down the tools in her hands, turning to face me fully. Now, I said. I think maybe I said exactly what I needed to say, even if I did not understand it at the time. Her antennae swayed gently, that soft, happy motion I had come to know so well, and for the first time since I had woken up on this strange ship, I did not feel like a stranger inside it. I felt like I belonged, not because ancient words had bound me here, but because I had chosen, again and again, to stay. 6 years hauling ice through empty space, and nothing interesting had ever happened to me. One shattered ship, one careless joke, and somehow I had found a home among the stars I never expected, standing beside someone who had seen something worth keeping in a frightened stranger pulled from the dark. I looked out through the wide window of the medical bay, watching distant stars drift silently past the healing hull of the ship that was now, impossibly, my home. Whatever waited for me out there in the endless dark, I was no longer facing it alone.